Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about two versions of the same film, but they are really about as different as two versions of the same film can be, I think. Suspiria from 1977, directed by Dario Argento, and Suspiria from 2018, directed by Luca Guadagnino. This was a request from a listener called William, so thank you for that. He actually requested the new version, but we've watched both because we'd never actually seen the original.
And, you know, I'm not a fan. Well, it's not that I'm not a fan. It's just I'm very ignorant. I've never been drawn to giallo or horror films.
Giallo.
Or horror films, or, you know, it's not my favorite mode of cinema. I mean, I've kept up with some of them because, you know, my job requires me to a degree, but it's never been an area of particular interest. Yeah, you know, I don't normally like being scared. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'm too susceptible, as you've seen, I'm too susceptible in normal movies to jump off my seat, you know, much less this kind of cinema. So actually, I didn't know much about it, and I think that seeing the Argento one, I can really understand why it's got the reputation that it has and why it's a cult film.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is fair to call it a cult film, right? Yeah. Despite the fact that it's very well known. It actually feels like giallo is kind of a cult genre.
Yes.
I think it's also called sometimes spaghetti slashers, in the same way that spaghetti westerns, you know, so it's like specifically Italian.
Yes, because my understanding of giallo or whatever, you know, from the Italian perspective, is like they are the equivalent of the série noire novels that got film noir names, so to speak, yeah? They're detective, murders, that kind of thing.
The name came from a series of paperback novels, I think.
Yeah, the yellow cover.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And they were thrillers, crime, that sort of thing. And then it became a film genre as well.
Yeah, but I think here in England, at least, giallo suggests like the supernatural or witchcraft or slasher or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we really specifically think about it in terms of film and not literature, things like that.
So, I'd never seen it before. And I must say, like, from the first few minutes, I mean, I literally went, wow.
Yeah.
You know, because just the colors and the mise en scène, it had a kind of, you know, a poetry about it, really. And literally in the first few shots, when Jessica Harper comes out of the airport, and you see her figure reflected in the light, and it creates kind of like this little supernatural thing, that kind of, it's almost like, kind of she's walking in two directions, or and very fleetingly, right? And you think, oh my God, like this is a real filmmaker, you know? And when I saw the Guadagnino Suspiria, I thought, now I understand what the fuck everyone was talking about, you know, in relation to, what's the Peach movie?
Call Me By Your Name.
Call Me By Your Name, because, you know, I really liked Call Me By Your Name, and I was, like, defending it, but actually, you see this, and it almost made my blood boil, really. Yeah. When I wasn't bored, I was angry.
Well, maybe we'll get on to that. Let's talk about the original Suspiria first.
Yes.
Because I had a similar reaction to you in those first few minutes. When it's in the airport, she gets into the cab, she's arriving. She's this American student who's arriving in Germany to join this dance academy. And, you know, everything up until she arrives at the academy, it's this giant red building, bright red, and it's raining outside, and there's a woman coming out, and she's kind of muttering and upset and screaming, and it's just, I loved all that, and I was really taken in by the boldness of the visuals and the strength of the visual design. And that started to lose its charm for me as I realised that the story was not very interesting. And actually, not so much that it wasn't interesting, but that it felt like the film wasn't even interested in its own story. It was very superficial and all about the visual, or audio visual.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because I think the visuals in the Argento film suggest something else. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was really taken by the imagery. So, you know, the moment where the pianist goes to walk into the city, right, and you see what are obviously like fake official buildings, but he's in the middle of the square, you know, and then the dog is possessed and turns on him. It's almost like you feel this, like, I don't know, this existential aloneness, or like that. Actually, the scene itself and what it suggests goes beyond what you're seeing. It kind of reverberates, in a way that, again, I can't help myself. Nothing in Guadagnino does, right? He tries to stuff it with importance, but it lacks moments like those. That you're seeing something very simple, but that it really suggests something deeper.
I mean, I felt like there was nothing in Guadagnino's version that was as big a waste of time as that scene with the dog.
Oh, I love that scene with the dog.
No, I thought that was tedious.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not kidding. Why would I kid?
Because you're a kidder, babe.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that clearly when we came out of both these films, we had different reactions. I definitely thought that Guadagnino's version was superior to Argento's.
I would completely disagree.
And you completely the other way around. What I also want to say, before we go any further, is that there will be spoilers coming up. And that may not be that critical for the original film, which I think people kind of know, but certainly for the newer one, which does take the story in different directions, there are spoilers coming up, so we are going to talk about the whole lot.
Yes. Let me tell you, so some people make great claims for the original Suspiria, right? I think it made the New York Times list of top 100 films and so on. I mean, I wouldn't go there. So, I mean, I think, he seems to be a fascinating director, and the film is beautiful and in many ways dazzling. Like, some of the ways that the things were conceptualized, like you have this glass of wine, that is so close in that it melts with the door. I mean, those things are just, if you're interested in cinema, it's stunning. The score, right? And, the way...
Like Goblin, a prog rock band from Italy.
I have no idea who they are. But it's full of, for me, fascinating things. The scene where she first goes into the school at night, and then there's the other woman running in the forest, right? And the way that it's filmed so that it has like a slight echo, or, she's going through the trees, so she's coming in and out of the image. I mean, those are really kind of beautifully done, and, I think the conceptualization of it is fascinating. And any image of that is worth like 1,000 of Guadagnino's, I mean. I
think what I like overall about the aesthetic of the original, and I think it is a film that is entirely aesthetic, is this kind of fairy tale thing. And I said to my brother, we're watching Suspiria, and I know he's big into it, he likes it. And he said, oh, fairy tale. And he said that Dario Argento apparently is a big fan of Disney's Snow White.
Yes.
And you can kind of see in the Technicolor the boldness of those images. In fact, I think didn't people say about Technicolor that it only did bold colours?
Yes.
And they used to their advantage here.
Yes.
And there is this kind of generalised fairy tale thing going on, but I do think it's not even a theme, it's really a flavour. Like, everything is just there to flavour the film. So you have this kind of fairy tale, it's almost like a fairy tale castle where all these girls live, and guys. And, there's that one scene where Jessica Harper's on the phone, I forget who to. There's moonlight, I think, coming in through the window, and there's a kind of flower there. And it's almost like, it really reminded me of the room with the rose in Beauty and the Beast, which was, 15 years after this, but you know what I mean? Had that similar feeling. I also think, obviously it's witches, and that's pretty Snow White, that's pretty fairy tale, and, the occult. But I do think these things just flavour the film. And actually, when you try and think, is it saying anything? What does it add up to? I really don't think... I can't find more to say than it's like Snow White with murders.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think there are other things, that are being said. I'm not sure I could be cogent, and rationalize them or kind of think them through, because, we've just seen one film after the other. But for me, first of all, it made you feel in particular ways, and you were very attuned, to them. You were also attuned to what the film was trying to do that it couldn't quite pull off, right? So there's a kind of an amateurishness to it, right? Particularly in the acting. You get a sense that there's like all of these women who were cast just because they were beautiful and they would take their clothes off, right? And they were available, and they probably got them off some strip joint or something. So on the one hand, you have like this really accomplished mise en scène, and then you have all these awkward bits that go along with it, right? So it's not as professional in quotation marks as it could be.
Its production values are mixed.
Yeah.
Because the production values of the visual design are epic.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, they're incredible.
They're incredible. And actually, and I think the laying out of themes of there is like this thing in the first one about America and Europe, and this thing about being alone and orphaned and without money, and finding a community. But actually, this community is like your worst nightmare, right? Yeah. And there's also the thing of ballet being ethereal and beautiful and, aspiring, like, I don't know, almost to godliness or something. Yeah, there is something about ballet that is so graceful and light and, and of course, it ends up being like a witch's coven, right? So I think the film is doing really interesting things, yeah. The blind man who relies on his dog for direction, who ends up being consumed by him, right? I mean, I think if you put all of those things together and think them through, I'm sure really interesting things come out of it. They're in the film. And they're not only in the film, but or at least they made me feel, and with very suggestive images, yeah? So the thing with the dog in that town square, I think is beautiful. A man alone in an empty city, with only his dog to guide him, and instead the dog consumes him, I mean, I thought that was like, there's a metaphor there, right? And it kind of hit me, right? It got to me. The woman trying to escape, and being ensnared in what looks like a huge spider web, right? But obviously it's just like plastic, strings or whatever it is.
Which bit was that?
In the house, yeah. The woman who falls, who tries to run from one
I thought that was
to
like barbed wire, like razor blade.
Well, it might be razor blades. To me, it looked like a spider's web.
Sure.
Yeah. I think the design was to be ensnared in that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that.
But obviously they didn't pull it off. yeah. So, but I don't mind that. I don't mind if the idea is there, but the realization is not realistic in quotation marks. I thought the original had a campy quality, right? It's both about itself and it's also ironizing a little bit what it's doing, without removing the effect. I think you could see that partly in the casting. Yeah, I thought laudably, as like this matron, military, slightly Nazi, or it has those connotations. And of course, she was in The Third Man. You might recognize her, from. And she was in that wonderful film, the Visconti film, and I forget the name, where she's a woman in love who basically betrays her country for the man she loves. She runs all over Venice, I think it is. Or is it Milan? It's from the 50s.
Who did you say it was by? Visconti.
Senso. It's beautiful. So she's the woman madly in love in Senso. And she's also in Bertolucci's 1900. And she's in Hitchcock, that film with Gregory Peck, I forget.
The Paradine Case. And Antonioni? Il Grido.
Oh, yes, my God, Il Grido.
My God.
Well, that's such a great film.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites, in fact. Like, her presence brings all of that. And then, of course, Joan Bennett, who I just realized, seeing the film, that I had never seen her in color. Yeah,
oh, really?
This is the first time, I always associated with film noir and the Fritz Lang films and the Ophuls films and and so on and so forth. And I was struck by the color of her eyes. I thought, she was so beautiful. Yeah, and she was very much herself in her way of speaking and you could tell they had a low budget and she was doing reams of dialogue in one setup and so it has all of those little problems.
And not very good dialogue.
And then it also had Udo Kier and Miguel Bosé, which adds a further layer of campiness to it. So for me, it was full of pleasures, from the casting, to the mise en scène, to what it's dealing with, really. So I liked it very much, and I can understand why people think of it as a great film.
I can definitely understand why people get attached to it, and why it had influence, and why people think of it so fondly. But I think that I had expectations of it because of that weren't met, and they were rudimentary expectations, such as I should have something to care about. Again, I think this comes down to the film not showing an interest, not feeling like it has an interest in its characters or stories, to the point where, so I don't care about them either. I didn't feel like it was asking me to care about them. Actually, it's all about the effect.
I think there's an element of truth in that, actually. But I also didn't mind, because it's not that kind of film.
Maybe it's just that I'm not on its wavelength, right? Maybe actually this genre of film, maybe this is common to it, and actually it's just something you have to buy into.
I mean, I think so, because the majority of these films, at least in Spain, the equivalent ones, that Jesus Franco made, I mean, it's part of a whole genre whose only function is really to scare you and to show you women in various suggestive stages. I mean, in the early films, not even of undress or anything, right? And I think it's an interesting genre, because they're genres of male frustration, So it's like, show me your tits and I'll kill you, basically. It's like, or like, let's get this woman naked and figure out like 25 different ways of like torturing and killing her, and So it speaks like a kind of a misogyny and a sexual frustration, and this genre, I think. Which actually this film is not quite, so it's of that genre, and it has the awkwardness and the basic premise, and kind of, there is, I mean, it is about women in a dorm. But it doesn't go in that prurient, misogynist direction, that so many of them do,
No, it's a tonal quality.
Yeah.
Because on the core of it, you could say, well, it's women dying and women being perpetrators.
Yeah.
And like you could read that very clearly as misogyny.
Yeah.
But it's a tonal aspect. It's an attitude as well, and that's not conveyed. That's not conveyed in tone by the film.
So I think all of that makes it really interesting to me. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if I'm attributing the campiness, right, or if it's something that is put there for you. Yeah, I mean,
it's not Rocky Horror, is it? I mean, I think it's maybe something that you find in it yourself. That's what it feels like to me.
Maybe. I mean, certainly, I mean, at that time, Udo Kier and Miguel Bosé were like practically children, right? I mean, Miguel Bosé must have been a teenager then, right? Not even in his maybe 20 or something.
He would have been 20, 21.
Okay, yeah. So I am now bringing a knowledge of all that happened afterwards, and the kinds of films and performances they end up doing afterwards. But I think, the use of Joan Bennett, I mean, she did do Dark Shadows on television, which, was supernatural. But, the uses of Joan Bennett and laudably, and there's also something, about the super aesthetization and the matter-of-factness of the horror, the kind of... It's an interesting tone. I'm not quite sure about it.
Would you say matter-of-factness? I mean, it's hardly sort of anatomically. It's just, I mean, it's really ramped up.
It's really ramped up. But what I mean is, maybe matter of fact. Well,
it's quite gruesome.
It is. Well, it's quite florid. So it's true. So let me rephrase that. By matter of fact, I mean that that it's going to happen.
Right.
Right. And they find ingenious ways of presenting it to you that, in a certain way, surprise and delight. Yeah. The whole beginning, with the two women, and one of them ends up kind of falling through
the glass
ceiling, and then somehow the wire gets caught in her neck, so she gets hung. I mean,
the glass ceiling. Now that could be a metaphor.
Well,
falling through the glass ceiling.
I'm not sure. So by matter of fact, I mean that it's expected that every so often you're going to have one, a woman being killed in a certain way. So that's what I mean by the matter of factness, I suppose. But maybe, I don't know, the regularity or the expectation that it will happen might be a better term. And I thought the ending was like amateurish and genius, right? So, I mean, this whole clue about the flower, it felt like an episode of, what's the Angela Lansbury program?
Murder, She
Wrote. Oh, the iris. The clue was in the iris. I mean, that was so dumb, right? And then there was also, like, I thought, when I was a student, I knew people who decorated their rooms like that. Right? They painted their walls mauve. Right? So it had that kind of homemade quality, but I was with it, and I thought it was like kind of conceptually so interesting. These secret doorways, this passageway. Where are they going to off? You initially kind of said, I mean, we were talking about who was going to be like
The murderer.
the murderer, right? I mean, I thought, well, it has to be one of the women because there were no men who had unimportant enough character, right?
But it was like a dude's hand. That's what I was thinking. Like at the start, it seemed to be like a bloke's hand that was coming in from out of frame to do some stabbings.
Yeah. So I think you're minimizing now the effect of that because I didn't know they were witches. Right.
But you did say, because I said, I reckon it's probably Satan. What about you? And you went, no, it's got to be witches.
Well, I think at a certain point in the narrative, it's it's got to be witches. But I think all of that developed organically, and to me was relatively a surprise, right? And and this idea that it's an old witch who's been living there since the 1830s and who basically needs a new body or something is how I understood it. Right?
Yeah, I think so.
I found all of that kind of interesting. I don't want to make too great.
It's hardly original, really. The sacrifice of a young girl to take over the body.
No, I mean it's not original though. I don't know where does it date from. I mean,
well, I think that it's one of these things that harks back to these old. I think fairy tale kind of stories.
Yeah, actually, I think they're middle.
They actually run.
They're Middle European ones in a way, right? Like Dracula and so on. So I thought the whole thing with the Romanians was really interesting. The fact that it was a coven, the look of the women, and working in the kitchen when they heard something, they came out with a butcher's knife. I mean, I thought all of that was great fun.
Especially in Germany as well, I think, because that is kind of what the Brothers Grimm are German, and that is the kind of seat of a lot of the imagery.
Yes.
That it draws on.
Yes. So I like that. I didn't mind the awkwardness or those moments of amateurs. In fact, I do think they add to a certain kind of campy quality, which I also enjoyed.
The dubbing is part of that as well. Because at the start we're going, is it English this? Is it? Because it was dubbed in English. And, a little bit of rudimentary research reveals that actually Italian cinema of this time, people just tended to... They were often cast with actors from many, many different countries, as this is. People would say their lines in their own language, and as the films travelled around different countries, they would be dubbed into those languages.
Yeah.
So really, there's no... You're thinking, should we watch the Italian version or the English version? There's no real sense of a dominant version, actually.
Well, there might be for certain kinds of films, but actually not for others. And I do think it's a mark of a sophisticated viewer, and certainly of a critic, if you're going to be adequate in the job at all, that you have knowledges and expectations of different types of cinema, and kind of you don't assume, the same ones for this type of cinema than for that type of cinema. And actually you could argue, that like in a lot of Hollywood cinema, a kind of a professionalism, because for a glossy, big budget kind of expert look, all you need is money, right? So you learn to look at those films in a different way, and actually having that glossy professional look and feel can often hide a paucity of ideas and and so on. So you don't go into this type of European 60s and 70s genre cinema, which by definition was low budget, with the same kinds of expectations, and they would all have been dubbed, so the sonic qualities would be very variable. But that's a minor flaw if it's compensated by imagination and ideas.
It would be interesting to try and find out the budget, but a quick search isn't giving me anything because you say by definition would be low budget, and certainly in comparison to Hollywood.
I think, in fact...
But, Argento was a successful filmmaker by this point.
He was a successful filmmaker. I read in Wiki that, the film had money from one of the studios, and might have been 20th Century Fox. So, it would have had a higher budget than most films of this type, which explains the casting, right? But nonetheless, I'm sure it would have been made for a budget, And it was also quite successful in the States, I understand. I read in the wiki page, I think, that...
Fox acquired the rights, so I think that seemed to happen after it was made.
Okay. And then it released it, and it was the 7th most successful Fox film of the year, I understand.
Despite initial reservations based on violent content, the film's American release was commercially successful and proved to be Fox's 7th highest grossing release of the year in theatrical rentals.
There you go.
Of all of Argento's films, Suspiria was its highest grossing in the US.
So my memory's not as bad. So,
is that memory of a thing long past or something that you read 20 minutes ago?
Caught out again. So, let's move on to the
remake.
Yeah. Which I hate.
Is there nothing you like about it?
No, of course there's many things I like about it. I really like Dakota Fanning.
Dakota
Johnson, who grows on me, because at the beginning of the film you think, oh, she's so wan and uninteresting. And she becomes more and more interesting as the film progresses, I think.
That's the same as she is in 50 Shades of Grey, which is a surprisingly good film. The sequels, not so much. But the first one, honestly, worth a go.
Well, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And I love Tilda Swinton in the role as the witch, because she's also... The Doctor. And she's quite good as the Doctor, though I think, why? Right?
Yeah, because she's playing this aged male doctor under a lot of makeup.
Yeah, why? Like, I actually, I'm trying to make a connection. Why have the same character? Can you imagine what a pain in the ass it must have been every day to put on all that makeup on her? And it just to feed an actor's ego, because really, it doesn't bring anything to the film at all that it's the same person playing that.
No, the thing is, if you know, or if you can tell, then the one kind of link that the film explicitly draws is the link between the scenes where the dance teacher, the female dance teacher that she plays, sits on the bed with Dakota Johnson, and then later, right at the end, Dakota Johnson sits on the bed with the Doctor, and there's this kind of mirroring of those scenes. But you're right. It feels completely purposeless, really. Noticing that is doing it a big solid.
Yes.
It doesn't need it, right? It could just be you could have cast an old man.
Yes, you could have. So let me ask you, what did you like about it?
I think it's much more ambitious, and maybe that's...
ambitious, yes. But...
maybe that's to be taken for granted, because what is the ambition of Argento Suspiria? It's to thrill.
Yes.
It's like a ghost ride. Actually, it reminded me to some degree of Drag Me to Hell, which I know you love. It's this kind of allegory of corporate America. And it doesn't have that, I don't think. I didn't see a way to read it as kind of deeply allegorical or anything. But the thing that Drag Me to Hell had that I think the original Suspiria has is an assault on the senses. Right? That opening scene of Drag Me to Hell was in the cinema, it was devastatingly loud as this kind of portal to hell opens up. You thought, oh my God, what's going on? And actually the thing I ended up not liking about it was that it just didn't stop. Throughout the film, just noise and flashing lights all the way through, like a ghost train, right? I think the original Suspiria is much more successful than that at using its visuals to thrill. This doesn't have that ambition. The ambitions that the new one has are to draw links between, I think, the modern world, allegorically, and the world of 40 years ago, where it's set in 1977, and the world 40 years before that, in the beginnings of the Holocaust and the beginnings of the war. Everyone is kind of living in the film with the past amongst them. So I think it's really interesting that the film has this backdrop behind it of the RAF, the Red Army faction, also known as the Baader-Meinhof group or Baader-Meinhof gang, who were these radical left militants in Germany at the time, and it's set explicitly during the German autumn of 1977, which was when you were remarking that you remembered this.
Yes.
This
the hijacking of the Lufthansa
of a plane and taking prisoner, kidnapping of a high-ranking German official who had been a Nazi.
Yes.
Because the thing is, they were furious about the fact that so many Nazis and Nazis of high ranking were still in positions of power. They hadn't been a purge. There hadn't been real denazification.
I know.
And they had a lot of support, right, until they killed that guy.
I know, but you see, now you're reading kind of. What does this have to do with witches?
Well, yeah. The thing is, but the thing is, it's so it's not an accident the film is set with this background.
No,
right?
it's not.
And people are dealing with their past and so I am about to agree with you that it's not being too generous to notice that the film wants to draw these links.
Exactly. We know the film wants to draw those links.
Right. And it's not being too generous to give it some credit for trying to do that. I think it is being generous.
No, I want to do the opposite. I want to attack it for trying to do that. So, because I think it has nothing to do with the center of the story. Unless you want to do something really banal with it. To talk about the evilness of witches, which is like mythological and so on in relation to actual real historical events, which is...
No, I don't think it is trying to do that. I think that would be too banal as well.
Well,
and insulting.
I think it is.
It
is insulting.
What I was going to say...
Why put it there at all, then?
What I was going to say was, it's not too generous to see that it's trying to do these things. It is too generous to help it get there, to put in so much work to help it make those links in your head.
Yes.
Right? I think the film could do it more explicitly and better. But I think you have this thing with the witches about this power struggle, right, between the witch played by Tilda Swinton and the witch you eventually see. I forget the name, Mother, whatever her name was, who's the really desiccated, ugly, odd one, who wants to take Dakota Johnson's body, right? It's connected to dance, right? Because like this old witch that you finally see at the end, she has no beauty in her anymore, no beauty in her life, and she explicitly denounces art in a line of dialogue, right, where she spits it at Tilda Swinton. It's not art, she says. And Tilda Swinton is someone who you're kind of being conditioned to see her as evil. It's too strong, but kind of threatening and up to something. Right, when you see her throughout the film, and particularly in the scene where she gives Dakota Johnson powers. She touches her hands, touches her feet, and you see this glow that she leaves. And then, as Dakota Johnson dances, she kills this other student who's trying to leave, basically, right? And I think it's a brilliant scene, the way
I don't like it.
Cuts across space. But as the film develops, Tilda Swinton...
develops feelings.
Right, she softens, or you see a softening in her, to the point where when it gets to the scene where Dakota Johnson is presenting herself to be sacrificed for the sake of this old witch, she's not up for it, right? She's trying to warn her away from it, essentially, without saying that in so many words. And I think it connects to dance, because she believes in dance. She believes in beauty. It's not just a front for her. Like the thing about the dance school being a front for the witches. It's like, it's not like a laundrette laundering money. It's actually something she believes in. This thing about the dance, this Vogue dance that they performed in 1948 or created in 1948. Vogue is, I think quite a charged term in German. If you think about the Volkswagen, right? You think about like the Nazis tried to like reclaim or
folk culture,
claim folk culture for themselves to make Nazis kind of connected with German. And I think the idea of this Vogue dance is a reclamation of that. And I think it's a reclamation...
Well, but I just think it's awful. I hated the dance sequences. I mean, this guy couldn't film a dance if his fucking life depended on it.
I knew you were going to say this, and I disagree with you.
Well, what's good... I'll tell you what's bad. What
you're going to say about what's bad is that you don't see any moves completed.
No, that's not what I was going to say.
No?
No.
Really? Then I can't predict you here. I was so sure that was coming. What I liked about the dance, particularly the Vogue dance, which you do see performed, is the intensity of it, and that there's something else going on during it. It's not just about the dance that you're seeing; it's about the looks that characters are sharing with each other, and the information, or the kind of whatever it is, just the characters exchanging things between them.
I thought the filming of it was amateurish in the extreme.
Yeah, go on.
You got no sense of formations. The camera was plonked normally far away. In the last sequence with the witches killing each other, where you had all of this frenetic dancing, it was like a super wide angle shot where you were meant to see the formations of the dancers, but really kind of far away, and with the dance not being conveyed at all, neither the dance nor the choreography nor anything was having an effect. The guy doesn't know how to film dance, even for effect. So I thought those two scenes, three. The rehearsal dance, the dance where the Joseph character comes to watch, and the final thing with the coven, is amongst the worst film dance I've ever seen.
I think that the dancing in the coven is not great, but I also think it's really not the point of that scene. But I agree that it's not like showing the dancing off.
Well, it's not just that it's not showing the dancing off, it's that it's not using the dancing expressively and purposefully to use, the rhythms and to find angles and camera movement to evoke something in the audience. The dancing there is just kind of contributing to a particular plot point without getting the audience feel, through the dance itself, which is a waste of the dance.
Right?
No,
sure.
So I thought that,
I think the Vogue dance is much more successful, and I think it's really interestingly choreographed. I think it's maybe it's because you maybe come to it with some expectation of it being ballet, maybe unfairly, but it's really not. It's earthy and it's quite vicious.
It's got good dancers. It's got interesting choreography. The director doesn't know what to do with it at all.
I think there's a huge variety of camera angles.
Well, but let me give you an example, because, there is a huge variety of camera angles. Too many of them, and none of them kind of effective. I mean, there's that whole scene where she says, I want you to jump. I want you to feel like it is to jump. You have to do this and extend your leg, or, a better director would have made you feel it when the girl was doing it, And here it's like, first flat, you just see a close up of the feet, blah blah. Then you see her in the air, blah blah. But nothing evokes that feeling of what it is to do that, or actually what it is to be constrained from doing that in the beginning.
I agree with that. I agree with that. So, but I wasn't even thinking
Knight and Dixie when it comes to
I wasn't even thinking of that, because I wouldn't have called that a dance scene. That's rehearsal. Maybe that's splitting hairs. I think of a dance scene as the dance, scene where people are dancing.
The people are dancing in rehearsal, right?
Like, she's jumping. I mean, that's a jumping scene.
There's stuff that preceded that and stuff that followed it. So at that moment, the teacher's not happy with her jump and makes her do it and over and over and over again. It becomes a big dramatic point. So actually, a better director would have expressed it, through the dance and visually.
I think that scene could have been better, certainly. I mean, I agree with you, and I think it could have been filmed better in all the ways you say. I would, because it's not a set piece, right? That's what I would consider a dance scene, a set piece. Anyway, I think to kind of finish that overall point I was making about, where the witches connect to the kind of historical guilt or the kind of evil that lives in them. That's kind of it. Like, there is a feeling with that old witch of the corrupt higher-up. Like, it's not unlike the corrupt higher-ups in the German system still.
Yeah, I think you're reaching.
Well, that's the thing, right? I think that's where I think it is being too generous to make that link in a way that the film is forcing me to.
Yeah, because if you follow it consistently, you can't make it. Because what happens then is like Suspiria wins everything. She wins the battle of the witches. But, witches and evil still exist in the world, right? I
think it's interesting that witches aren't explicitly evil in this. Like, there is something, they definitely do bad things. They have got up to bad things, and you see it throughout the film. But it's certainly the case, maybe not certainly, I think it's the case that they're not explicitly coded as evils in the world.
Well, they're certainly killing a lot of people in very painful ways throughout the film.
They are.
So nice they're not.
There's something that, like I said, I think the dancing in particular is that there's something about resistance in it. Like this Vogue thing is about kind of resistance to what the Nazis tried to take from us.
I mean, I think the whole Nazi thing, it doesn't work. I also think the whole setting it in the 1970s really constricts the film. It looks grey and flat. They're trying to symbolize things. So it's very significant. Part of setting it in the 70s is that you have the Berlin Wall throughout, right? So, these people are all living in a kind of a prison, even when they're outside. It's kind of, you see the wall. And you think, okay, well, what about the wall? How is our protagonist imprisoned, even in her thoughts? You can't, like the film is putting all these things there, and then you just can't connect them.
The thing that's more interesting than the wall, which I agree, I didn't feel anything was really made of, was the banners outside the doctor's flat in the kind of courtyard where he lives, because they're these explicitly left-wing resistance flags in support of the RAF
Yes.
and so on. And he's an interesting figure because I think he's someone who you are probably supposed to see ambiguity in his history.
No, the film offers contradictory things. I just think the film could have lost that character, to be honest. I thought, another character overladen with, symbolism. Because the story basically is that he waited too late to get his wife out of Berlin. She couldn't get home to get her papers proving she was an Aryan, and died in a concentration camp. And he's felt, he hasn't known what happened to her, and he's felt guilt and shame ever since. I mean, it's a film that's really trying to do too much and offers too little, and has too little artistry. There's not a single image worth looking at. I thought the use of the music...
I think that's so unfair.
No, it's not.
So unfair.
No, it's not.
So unfair.
It's kind of a dispassionate statement.
Well,
Name one. Name one.
Well, name one. I already told you. I think the scene where through telepathy or telekinesis she kills the other girl.
Oh, I hated
is
that
brilliantly
film.
put together.
I don't think
and brilliantly conceptualized.
I don't agree.
Me.
I mean, it's cross-cutting.
Yeah.
From one to the other. It's like absolute basic.
What's wrong? That's such a non-argument. It's so basic. So much filmmaking is just filming a person, filming the reverse shot. It's basic, but you love it. That's not a fair criticism.
Well, if it works, I love it. But I didn't think it was particularly distinguished. It wasn't evoking anything. It wasn't even evoking much of a connection, or how the suffering of one was either intentional or unintentional by the other. The linking between them, particularly in what we get to know subsequently, that she's the big bazooka of all witches. I mean, she must have been feeling something. She must have been knowing that this was happening. I mean, something could have been hinted or foreshadowed, or I mean, it's a really flat scene.
Well,
I think it's a very
I think
basic
it's worth
scene.
a second viewing. And I would be interested to see it again for that revelation, to see if it does kind of crop up here and there in ways that you didn't notice. But I think that for me, that scene is about the weaponization of a woman's body. I think that's interesting, and I think that
is interesting.
I think that links in with dance and the way dance is conceptualized by the Tilda Swinton character as powerful. I think the thing that's
deadly, because I mean, here dance is being used to kill somebody.
Yeah, but also in that folk dance that is a kind of centerpiece, it's powerful for a different reason. It's powerful artistically, right? Wow. And I think something that's interesting generally about witches and witchcraft is the idea that it's an expression of female power that doesn't require male permission to have, and that's why it's so threatening to men.
Well, yes, and I think that's why it's so interesting. And therein also lies my criticism of the film. Because the film likes to have it both ways, right? It kind of, some of the feminist elements in it come from some of the things that the witches say. Right? Yet, the witches are the most evil, and they revel in their evil and so on. And who's the good person in the film is basically the doctor, right? Who is a man, but of course who ends up being played by Tilda Swinton. So, there might be layers to unpeel there. But I think it's a really muddled film. I think it looks really ugly, and not in an expressive way. It's grey, and the shots don't seem to have been thought through in relation to compositions, or to the expressive power of a composition. I couldn't detect any patternings, and I hated the look of it. Yeah.
Saving all the colour till the end, though.
Sorry?
Saving all the colour till the end. See, what Argento does is he goes, colour, 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 colour. And what Guadagnino does is goes, no colour for 2 hours. And then at the end, everything is blood red.
Yeah, but it needn't have been that ugly, And you were saying, well, that's the way Berlin is.
But I said that with a bit of, I didn't entirely seriously.
No, we were talking because the image was so grey.
Yeah.
And you said, but that's the way
that's
Berlin
Berlin in 70s.
And Berlin is grey. But they were fucking indoors. Right? I mean...
It's grey
and you have, these young girls with ambition that are being manipulated, and there's witches, and, there should be all this intensity. And what you're watching is this boring grey. And it's boring. It's not even interestingly used grey. It's just flat grey throughout. I mean, I hated it.
All right. I didn't hate it. I didn't say I didn't love it, but I definitely liked it more than the original because I think there's more to latch onto. I think the original, once you have appreciated that it has this extraordinary kind of visual style and kind of wildness, there was nothing even, nothing slightly below that surface for me to really get attached to. And I felt that really significantly because I felt that even the murders I wasn't enjoying. Like I wasn't getting the thrill or the excitement or the just like the laugh of how they went or anything like that in the original. Whereas in the second one, I kept on being interested in the murders and tortures because I did have something to latch onto with the characters who were suffering them.
Well, I mean, I know nothing about Guadagnino, right? So I could be completely, off the wall. But my feeling in watching the films was that Dario Argento is an artist, and Luca Guadagnino comes across as some posh kid, trying to be significant without, having a sense of the form that he's working in. Mm. And I have now seen quite a lot of Guadagnino films, and I've liked them to different degrees. But this is the first time I really feel like this is such crap, and such pretentious crap.
I think pretentious is definitely too harsh. I think pretentious is definitely too harsh.
I think it's pretentious in the extreme, and that includes the dual casting of Tilda Swinton. I can imagine their discussions.
You can imagine quite a lot. Well, just like I can imagine Dario Argento going, "Fuck it, who cares about the story?" I can imagine things too.
Well, I mean, I'm saying it, because I also listened to Tilda Swinton had this conversation with John Berger. I love John Berger. I love Tilda Swinton, and the conversations between them were like, maybe I'm just not an artist, but they were really so pretentious. And I could just, but at least, she's a fantastic actress, and John Berger is, I've never read his novels, but I've certainly read his essays. He's a wonderful thinker, right? So, that kind of reaching, I kind of, in a way, I found it pretentious, but I also admire it. It's a kind of searching. But here, it just felt, that it was all reaching without any real sense of how to get there. I think my experience of watching Guadagnino films is I saw I Am Love, which I kind of liked, though it also felt kind of awkward, though there's this very moving dialogue about, a young lesbian's feelings, and, I think Tilda Swinton plays the emotionally unavailable mother, if I'm remembering correctly. I also saw the remake of La Piscine with Ray Fiennes, in which I loved Ray Fiennes in that, but again the film had awkwardnesses, but actually I also didn't mind. And then Call Me by Your Name, I really loved it, and I my normal expectation would have been to not respond as I'm doing, because actually I am responding the same way that friends of mine were responding to Call Me by Your Name, right? Like, I thought, that's so unfair. There's different ways of being gay and blah, 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 and you're making all these defenses for the film. But whereas I saw this one now, and I felt, anyway, I wouldn't have wanted to react the way I do. It certainly isn't a prejudice against Guadagnino films or anything like that. I mean, I just thought those layers that you seem to admire, that you're attempting to make connections between those things, to me, it felt pretentious, overburdening, not very well connected to the story, if connected at all. I still haven't figured out how it really connects. I mean, if you wanted to make a film about the connections between Baader Meinhof and Nazis, why not make that film?
The thing I really respect about the new one is that it takes what are, like I say, not even themes of the original film, but flavours, and actually tries to mine them for thematic depth and possibility. So I said to you, when we found out that the second one was so much longer than the first, I said, how do you make that film into 2.5 hours?
You put a lot of Nazis and Baader Meinhof into it.
That's the answer.
And don't connect it.
I think for the most part it filled the time pretty well. It made sense that it was getting this length out of that premise, because it really is just the premise. that it takes. The premise and the bare bones of the story, and it changes so much beyond that. And the bit of the film that I like the most is, and I just went looking for the line on Google, is when Dakota Johnson's lying in bed, having screwed up was it she screwed the folk dance goes wrong, right? The girl breaks her leg, and Tilda Swinton comes in to see her, and Dakota Johnson says, "Why is everybody so ready to think the worst is over?"
Yes.
And there's this great thing in that line, and that's where I think it links to today as well, because this film was made in the middle of the Trump years, and I think these films that are made in the middle of the Trump years, despite the fact we are now out of the Trump years, and so these kind of sentiments have very quickly, I think, lost a lot of that power. They really, really speak to the feeling that we had in those Trump years of how much worse things can get, and that speaks to back in 1937, the 40 years before the film is set.
Well, let me throw something at you, because you see, if you wanted to make the film like that, you could have connected the story to anything contemporary, because it's not as if in the 20th century, the Jewish Holocaust was the only Holocaust that we've had, right? Like, we had the Armenians before, and then Cambodia, and so it seems like every 10 years somewhere in the world, there's kind of like some mass killing of an ethnic group or a minority of some kind, So to set it in Germany, to set it in those two particular periods, if what he wanted to do was like through this story, because you have to think, why choose Suspiria anyway? What does Suspiria bring to an analysis of that connection between the 70s and the 40s? Which I'm still not getting, right? So if
it feels like you're not trying.
No, I am. I've listened to you. You're not giving me anything.
I gave you a whole paragraph.
No, you're telling me, that
I'm telling you what I got, and you're going.
That you're telling me that he's trying to make those links. I know he's trying to make those links, but what did he do with them? And you agree with me. You said you did.
It's an expression of the cultural past that we live with, and the feeling of not getting rid of it. And that line, why is everybody so ready to think that the worst is over? The feeling of, where we are now, things can't possibly get worse. Well, actually, they can. There are all these kind of paths laid out ahead of you, and so many of them are worse.
Well, I agree that, I agree with that sentiment, but how the film works it out thematically, I don't see it. I don't get it. So, that's an interesting line in the film. But, where does the big blow up with all the witches come in relation to that idea, if that's a central idea in the film? I don't see it. The same way that I don't understand, because, so you made the connection between that scene and the scene with Joseph at the end, and, Suspiria.
Based on the casting, yeah.
Yeah. But also, at least now from you saying that line, the line in the other scene was, we don't need your guilt or your shame.
Yeah, we need guilt and we need shame, but not from you.
But not from you. So, well, actually, I had misread the line, because I think this thing about needing guilt and shame is an interesting kind of thing. Is that what the film is saying? But then, what does all that dance with the witches in the last number have to do with, guilt and shame?
Well, the dancing after she's exploded all the witches who voted.
No, at the moment that they're all exploding and, she kisses them all and the devil comes out. I don't get it.
She's got the devil on her side. She's powerful. I think that the line about needing guilt and shame, but not from you, I quite like, because I read that as setting the Doctor free. Like,
I like that as well.
She's told the Doctor the truth about what happened to his wife, and he will feel guilty for that, and then immediately lets him free of it by removing all his memories.
Yeah.
Although I did then think, he's going to be treated as an Alzheimer's patient and be sent to a hospice. Like, he could be better for
Well, I think he only erased the memories of the covens.
Yeah, but the nurse comes in and he says, "Who are you?"
I know, but then...
And then you're like, oh, God, it's going to go very badly for him.
Anyway, let's wrap it up, really. So, what your last paragraph on it?
They're both worth watching once. The original film is so easy to see why it's as renowned and influential and respected as it is. I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone say, but beyond that, it's pretty thin, isn't it? And I think it is.
Well, I'm not sure it is. I'm not saying that it isn't, but I'm not sure that it is. But I found it visually and conceptually dazzling, right? Like, you know, it's a real kind of filmmaker with control of his medium, who's, if not his means, you know, who's making it. I really did find it like, you know, gobsmacking. Yeah, like literally, I, you know, went wow several times. So I loved it. I'm not sure I'd see it again either. You know, like I'm not that interested myself personally in the genre, but the Guadagnino one upset me.
Well, the Guadagnino one, I would say, I respect its ambition, and I respect, you know, what it's drawn out of what I think is very thin original material, and where it's found places to kind of insert themes of its own interest. I do think you do have to meet it more than halfway in building out those kind of metaphors and links for yourself. It could be a better made film, but there are lots of things I liked about it.
You're so generous.
Well, you're just you know, you're tired. It's gone midnight, and you're grouchy and need a glass of Ovaltine.
That's probably true. All right. Thank you very much for listening. We're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye bye.